Now, on the subject of the Fed, continuing on, and this is very relevant today. It's very topical because Janet Yellen is testifying before Congress, and a question came up. I just read this online. A question came up. I think one of the senators asked her what would be the effect. Trump has proposed doing kind of like a semi default or renegotiating, right? That's kind of, he's all caught up in a lot of the same flawed understanding. But basically, what Trump was proposing was that, instead of paying Treasury holders back the full face value, you pay him back something less than the face value. In other words, he's looking at it from the standpoint of his own personal businesses. Of course, he's not a currency issuer, and oftentimes in the private sector, these deals get renegotiated. In bankruptcies, things get renegotiated. So he's saying either cut the interest rate, right, or pay back a lesser amount, which would equate to also some sort of a haircut, right? And Janet Yellen, she said that this would be a disaster. This is unthinkable. Treasuries are the most important financial security in the world, right? A lot of the things we know, yeah, but a lot of also jingoistic kind of responses. And she said the effects would be highly uncertain, but at the same time highly destabilizing. Well, if you say they're highly uncertain, we don't know if they're destabilizing or not. But she doesn't know, which is incredible. So let me school her as if she's really watching this. If Trump were to say to everybody, hey, instead of the government paying you back full face value, we're going to pay you back some haircut beneath that. What is that? Basically, that's the same thing as the government levying a tax. It is taking away income and savings, right? You're not getting the same amount back. So it's like a tax. It's functionally the same thing as a tax. We get taxed every single day. It's not the end of the world. What about people who would say, well, nobody would ever buy treasuries again because they'd be afraid? So what? Because the most important buyer of them all is the Fed, which can buy in an unlimited amount, and that's exactly the mechanism by which it sets rates. And we also know there's 19 trillion of these babies out there, so it's not like there's no supply for the Fed to buy, and the government is issuing them all the time. So, and third point I want to make, the Fed has considered, and other central banks around the world have actually instituted negative interest rates, which is basically the same thing as what Trump is proposing, a little bit different, a little hybrid. The money paid is essentially being taxed away at some rate because you're earning a negative interest. You have to pay it back, or it's paid back to the central bank. It's all the same stuff. She doesn't get it. She said it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be terrible. First of all, lady, you set the interest rate. Period. Nobody else. Not bond market vigilantes, not China, not the Saudis. You set the interest rate, okay? So it doesn't matter if nobody buys. Doesn't matter. Why we even sell these things in the first place, to me, is beyond comprehension. Because the government doesn't need to sell treasuries. It's a reserve drain, and it really goes back to the gold standard. And by the way, since 2008, when the Fed pays interest directly on reserves, the management of the supply of reserves in the banking system, there's less concern about that because it pays interest directly. So, pretty funny to see these comments just saying it's like a tax. What Trump is proposing is basically like a tax. And by the way, where Trump is so off on this is he thinks that helps the American people. Those treasuries are the biggest asset that the world owns, 19 trillion. The biggest dollar denominated financial asset that the world owns are those treasuries. So cutting that amount is a tax, and that's not beneficial to anybody. To anybody. Not even the government.